Hello, true crimeers. It is time for another true crime in a short amount of time, and it's also another Coldest Cases by Canadian Province. Today, we're going to Manitoba, and this is the case of Kerrie Ann Brown. Viewer discretion is advised. Kerrie Ann Brown was a 15-year-old girl living in Thompson, which is in Manitoba, Canada. On the night of October 16th, 1986, she had gone to a friend's party with a friend of hers named Nicole. The plan that night was that Kerrie was going to stay the night at Nicole's house after the party, but plans apparently, well, they got changed. These are some of the photos from the night of the party, and by all accounts, it was a pretty chill event, very just kind of calm, just friends being friends, hanging out. Sometime before midnight, Nicole's ex-boyfriend shows up to the party. This prompts Nicole to want to leave. So her and Kerrie leave the house the party is at shortly before midnight. And then Nicole realizes, well, she forgot her purse. So the two of them go back to the house. It's there that Nicole allegedly gets into some sort of argument with her ex-boyfriend. And at that point, no one's really sure when exactly Kerrie kind of left the scene. But several minutes later, Nicole goes to look outside and she doesn't see Kerrie. She says she sees her shoe prints in the snow leading away from the house towards the road. It looked as if Kerrie had walked away from the house and possibly got into a car with someone. Who that someone was, she did not know. When Kerrie didn't arrive home the following day, her family obviously got concerned and they spoke to Nicole. Nicole said that she thought that, Kerrie had gotten a ride home with someone else because she had gotten into a fight with her ex-boyfriend and, it was a whole ordeal. But that wasn't actually the case because Kerrie never got home the next day. In fact, she hadn't been seen by anyone. So her family obviously panics and they report her missing right away. I mean, she's a 15-year-old girl who's just suddenly vanished. So they make flyers and they start searching around everywhere. They're asking the friends at the party if they know anything, but no one seems to know anything at all. Unfortunately, it would not take long to find Kerrie. A day after she was reported missing, there were two horseback riders who were in kind of this wooded area. They had ridden, I guess, just past a graveyard in the area to get into this wooded portion. That is when they saw a body just sort of lying there in the middle of the woods. She was wearing a pink and leopard patterned outfit. She had on a pair of white socks, and she was lying on top of her jacket. When police arrived, they determined that she had been bludgeoned to death by some branches. And then later it would be determined that this young girl was also sexually assaulted. The body was that of 15-year-old Kerrie Brown. Allegedly, according to a emergency operator who took, 911 calls, 2 hours or so in the time frame of when Kerrie would have gone missing, some man called 911 to report in a panicked way that he had just killed someone. He was really frazzled. He wouldn't give his name. He didn't say who the victim was. He wouldn't provide anything. But he, for some reason, wanted to call to report that he had done something. But he hung up the phone, and so they never found out who that person was. That phone call, now that tape, is apparently mysteriously gone. But before it did disappear, no one seemed to recognize the man's voice. They also didn't have any idea if this had any connection whatsoever to do with the murder of Kerrie Brown. But when police looked into it, you know, and this is like, now we're talking like weeks or months later, there were no other reported murders in that area or the surrounding areas in that entire time frame of when that phone call was made. The only murder that took place that they're aware of that particular evening was that of Kerrie Brown. So the coincidences, that's pretty astonishing. Police were kind of at a loss. They didn't really have a whole lot of evidence. They did have tire tracks that were found near her body. There was like a rubber floor mat that was probably in the car. They think they used that rubber mat to get some traction to drive away because it was snowy. There wasn't a whole lot of other evidence left behind. And this is before DNA was a very prominent thing. A witness would come forward to say that on the night that murder took place, this man saw two vehicles pull away from the area where Kerrie's body was found. One vehicle was a white van. The other was some sort of like muscle car. The muscle car was described as a vehicle that people were very familiar with, apparently. It belonged to a 22-year-old man in the area named Patrick Sumner. This immediately, just in police's minds, he did it. Yep, this witness says he saw a car that looked like this guy's car leaving the scene, so it's got to be him. So they very promptly, they bring him in for questioning, but they don't really like start it in the proper way. They basically just tell Patrick, like, you might as well confess because we know it's you. And he's like, you've never even met me before. You don't know who I am. You're just now saying I did it based on this one person's observations. Now, his alibi is a little shaky. He says he was kind of out. He had gone to a bar or two that night. He had dropped a friend off. Then he had gotten home sometime around 10 and then stayed home. And his mom vouched that he did come home sometime around 10 p.m. But kind of after that, it's a little iffy because she would have been killed sometime in the midnight range. Police say they found hair in Patrick's vehicle that they said was similar to Kerrie's hair, but they weren't able to actually test it to say it was her hair. Again, this was well before they were using like hair for DNA. They said they also found a red stain in his car. That's good enough to arrest him and charge him with this because that's got to be blood. So they arrest him, and then within a week of the murder, he's arrested, he's arraigned, and the judge is like, you're not going forward with this because you have no actual evidence. Turns out the red stain in his car was actually just tomato juice. And the hair, they had no idea if it actually matched Kerrie's at all. They also said, well, we found a shirt in Patrick's house that had blood on it, and that blood type was the same blood type as Kerrie's blood. So they said, well, that's got to be a shirt that Patrick was wearing when he killed her. Problem is the shirt they found was way too big. It was actually his father's shirt, and he said the blood came from his dad from, I guess, pimples. They couldn't like say that blood was Kerrie's or if it was the dad's, Patrick's dad's blood. And ever since that day, Patrick has been free, technically. However, because of all of this, he has been basically found guilty by court of public opinion. Because the police did such a half-assed job, they just said, he's the guy, based on one person seeing a car that looked just kind of like his. He must be it. So the public's like, oh, well, then he's a killer. He killed her. So ever since then, the guy, he's still living in the same area. By the way, he took polygraph tests. He willingly provided his hair samples. He gave his fingerprints. He gave everything. The guy was extremely cooperative. He didn't even like ask for a lawyer when like they were grilling him because he said, I have nothing to hide. You guys can ask me literally anything and I'm going to tell you the truth. But it didn't matter to the public because it still seems that to this day half of the public thinks he did it and the other half doesn't. It's important to note that like Kerrie's brother actually doesn't really believe that Patrick is guilty. And then what about this telephone call that was made? Well, apparently they didn't really look into it. They kind of just disregarded it. It didn't sound like it was Patrick's voice, so, well, we can't, let's leave that tape alone then. And now the tape's gone. So really all they have is that they believe Kerrie was likely killed sometime between midnight and about 2 a.m. or so. They have very sketchy witness testimony about vehicles that may have been in the area. They had tire tracks that did not match anyone's tires that were involved in the case. It does sound like they had DNA left behind that they did collect. And as of now, I believe they've said they've taken that DNA and they've run it through the genealogical testing that we have nowadays that's like basically solving every crime now. And from what I understand, I mean, I don't think they've actually said it didn't match Patrick, but they haven't arrested him or anything. So they haven't arrested anyone after retesting this DNA. It seems to be pretty hush as to like where the DNA stands at this point. Other witnesses came forward again to say, well, Patrick, he cleaned his car. I saw him washing his car like a day or so after the girl went missing and was killed. So people aren't allowed to wash their cars anymore. Otherwise, you're now a murder suspect. See, that's the thing. Is like that this is the evidence they were using to say he was guilty. A person washes their car. People do that. Just so happens to be a coincidence that he washed his car after he's named a suspect in this case. It's just so stupid. So they really just don't have any other suspects. They really honed in on him, and I think they just didn't look into anyone else, and that's kind of problematic, but it does sound like they are looking into this further more. They're running more tests, having new eyes look at it. So unfortunately, the murder of this 15-year-old girl is unsolved. Who the phone call came from, they have no idea. Who could have done this to her, as of right now, they have no idea. I know they interviewed people from the party. I would assume they ruled them all out, but knowing how they looked at Patrick, I don't know if they actually did all the work, but I guess time will tell. But unfortunately, her case is still unsolved, and if you have any information about this case, especially if you live in the Manitoba area, you can contact the local authorities and you can talk to them anonymously. You can email them too, and maybe you can help get justice for her and her family. So that is it for today's shorter case. So we will see you, true crimerers, for the next one. Should be tomorrow. So yeah. Until then, see ya, sees candy.